What's going on, guys? Joshua Gibson here with the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. This is episode 11. I'm joined today by Greg Farris. Greg Farris is the founder of Myobrain, an online coaching company for strength athletes, and also he's a registered dietitian. Greg, how you doing?
Doing well, man. How are you?
Doing pretty well. If you could just give us a brief background, anything you find relevant, maybe your competitive history, and then your education.
Yeah. So, again, I kind of started Myobrain very organically in like 2012, 2013. I had no plans of doing online coaching or doing something like that. I was just a sophomore in college, but I just posted a lot of my stuff online. So I would just like post my meals online, post my lifts online, not really like educational content at all. And this was back when like macros were not really a thing. Like 3DMJ was doing it, and like Bogus was big. But as far as like your everyday population, like if you just put three numbers on your screen, like they had no idea what you were talking about, right? So I just got a lot of interest about what I was doing. Now I'd give some of my friends like free plans. I'd charge someone like $20 and $30, and then start just like, again, build little systems of, a website and starting to actually formally coach people and whatnot. And then it's kind of just organically grown throughout that process. So I was probably like legit in 2013, where I had like, a website and a separate email and like knew what I was doing. I probably did it for like a year before then, and kind of steadily grown exponentially every few years. And then I did that throughout my process of school. I started that when I was like about a sophomore in college, finished undergrad, and then went to grad school, and then just finished grad school up in 2016. And again, Myobrain was so big by that time, I was fortunate enough just to be able to do that full time. But I pretty much built all of those things while being in school, not really knowing if it was going to be like my profession or not, but just kind of being like, I'd rather do that than work at Outback Steakhouse sort of thing
Right.
for some money. And then again, it's kind of got fortunate enough with good things happening that now it's a full-time gig for me. And then, yeah, my undergrad degree is in health promotion at Emporia State. It's pretty much exercise science. We also did some like marketing things and like charity events and fundraisers, did some experience with that. And then my master's degree, University of Oklahoma, is in dietetics nutrition. So that's kind of like my business experience and also my academic experience. And sort of lifting wise, I've dabbled in pretty much everything now. When I first started Myobrain, I was doing bodybuilding, did that for a year or two, competed in the show, switched over to kind of the hybrid bodybuilding powerlifting for a few years. I think I did a total of 5 powerlifting meets in 2 years. I did USAPL Nationals twice. And then due to like just some injuries and being a little bit burnt out, just the monotony of squat, bench, and deadlift, I started doing CrossFit a little over a year ago from today. And I've done 2 CrossFit competitions now. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything. Might jump into weightlifting and make it, 4 for 4 with all the barbell sports one day.
Sure. So my question would be, how did competing in each of those different sports change your approach to training and nutrition? So starting with bodybuilding, then powerlifting, CrossFit.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think definitely with bodybuilding, a lot of people will say this, and I hate to put like a number on it of like bodybuilding is 80% diet, 20% whatever, right? But it's certainly a lot of nutrition. You see a lot of people, if you walk in like the typical Gold's Gym, you see a lot of people that look a certain way. You see them like a year later, like the same. Like they train hard, like they're not in there just messing around. Like they legitimately go after it, but they just like don't eat enough protein or too much fat or whatever they're doing. So I think I got really into nutrition kind of through bodybuilding and wanting to just build muscle and get leaner. I was certainly into the training aspect of things, but I kept it like pretty simple. I was doing, upper, lower, push, pull legs. I would do 8 to 12 reps. Like I never got really into the training side of bodybuilding, to be honest with you. It was just like hit your chest for a few sets, get a pump, move on to your back sort of a thing. But nutrition of, dialing your macros and doing some carb cycling, And then, trying to do a contest prep, mess around with like refeeds and how often to cut your carbs and how patient to be and what your pace should be. Again, that just taught me a lot about actual nutrition consulting, because again, that's just essentially muscle building and fat loss on a huge scale, right? A very important scale. And that's still majority of my clients' goal, is to build muscle, lose fat. Then when I got into powerlifting, nutrition was still somewhat important, but I didn't compete in a weight class that was difficult for me to be under for a while. But in my first 3 meets at 183 or 70, I think 83 kilos is what it was. And I was like 175. So I had like no chance of not making that weight class. So I kind of like stopped tracking my food for a while, kind of ate that based on habits. But then I got really into like the training side of powerlifting. So, tracking your tonnage and having, graphs and spreadsheets of how much squat tonnage I had, my accessory work and all of that. So it was very different than bodybuilding training, where I felt like training was the biggest portion of powerlifting success, and nutrition was kind of just like, don't mess it up. That did change quite a bit when I dropped from my last 2 meets to the 74 kilo class, or 163, because I kind of can float between 170, 175 if I kind of just ate what I wanted. So having to cut, roughly 7 to 10 pounds was pretty difficult for me. So I really had to like go back to tracking things again. That kind of brought back the bodybuilder in me of having, the low fat everything and some of those bodybuilder habits, But again, I think that prepared me well for that, because I was confident I could get to 163, because I did a bodybuilding show at like 148. So it didn't really seem like that big of a contrast for me. So that's kind of where I thought really hit the picture for me in powerlifting. Initially, nutrition wasn't important, but it became important as I wanted to become more competitive in a lower weight class. And then he's finally kind of now going into CrossFit. I think it's a little bit of both, where certainly CrossFit is so varied in its needs. Training is super important. You can't just not do muscle ups or not do snatches and get better at them, right? So it has to be very, very organized, but also because the training volume is so high. I've never trained like this. If people play like high school sports, it's more like that, where you have practice in the morning, you lift weights at noon, and you go back and practice at night. Like, it's a lot of volume. So trying to figure out exactly what my nutrient needs are, it was a big change, right? I mean, you're talking like going from 350 carbs doing powerlifting, thinking that's like a lot of food, to being like 500 on a low day doing CrossFit sometimes. So again, you kind of just have to learn with how much volume you're doing. And people are different, right? Some people can just do CrossFit for 45 minutes a day. But if you're doing competitive CrossFit, it's very high volume, then your nutrition needs are just through the roof. Mm-hmm. And one other thing, a specific thing I'll talk about with CrossFit too, is it's the first sport I've done since playing basketball that's very like metabolic demanding. So most people don't have a problem with appetite before or after like bodybuilding stuff or powerlifting stuff, or I'm sure even weightlifting stuff. It's just like doing some singles, doing some bench press. Like, it's not a lot of movement. You're not sweating. You're not breathing hard, sort of that stuff. Versus like, I'm sure you've seen this. You can do like a CrossFit workout and then be on the floor for like 20, 30 minutes afterwards. And it's like really hard to eat afterwards. Like it could be hours until you feel like you want to eat. And if you go do that at noon and then you want to come back at 5 and train again, and you have no appetite, like you're gonna suck at 5 o'clock. So having to find like foods as well that make it, if you don't have a huge appetite, you still kind of get all your calories in, has been a new challenge for me as I've gotten into CrossFit.
Okay. And you just touched on it briefly, but what do you find to be the most difficult aspects of nutrition and then training for yourself? Maybe the hardest part to adhere to, or the hardest part to kind of get correctly?
Yeah. Definitely easy to say for training is not doing too much. It was the same thing with powerlifting and bodybuilding, but even more so with CrossFit now, of starting in the game. Again, I trained a very competitive gym too, where not everyone there, a lot of people there have been doing it for like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So they're very good at a lot of things. And like, I just started and I'm like, well, why can't I do what this guy did, even though he started like in '08 sort of a thing. And again, there's so many different avenues of gymnastics and weightlifting and running and blah, blah, blah. And you always feel like you can get better at stuff. So it's really easy just to like do everything. And I've had to learn to be really patient with stuff. It is a little bit different for me. And something else too, I think this comes from my powerlifting background of feeling like I need to have a high frequency on something to be successful in it, right? So same thing with weightlifting. Like if you didn't do a snatch for 2 weeks, the next time you snatch, you'd be like, oh, I'm nervous, right? So like I had come from a background where like I did squat, bench, and deadlift, high frequency. I built the confidence with them. And with CrossFit, it's very different in that, again, there's 100 moves you need to get good at. So there may be a workout you're scheduled to do on Friday and you look at it and it says bar muscle ups. And you're like, oh man, I haven't done a bar muscle up since March, right? It's been like maybe months since you had done that. Maybe something that's even like really simple, like, oh, I hadn't done a wall ball in 4 weeks. And even though you're competent in that movement, you have to be like, oh, well, I have never done this movement for this many reps, or I haven't done this movement in a month or two. You still have to be confident in your ability to accomplish it. You can't just be like, oh, well, I haven't done a hang snatch in 4 months. I'm just not going to do well today. And that can't be your attitude. You have to go in being like, I've never done a hang snatch, overhead squat, snatch balance complex, but I'm going to, give it my best shot. So that's something different with training too, with CrossFit, is that it's not as controlled as powerlifting. So you have to be more confident in your ability as opposed to just rely on your training so much, if that makes sense. And the nutrition, I think, again, the biggest challenge for me is just learning to get enough food in consistently, especially me being a smaller guy coming into CrossFit. I'm actually kind of like perfectly built like height-wise for CrossFit, which is the first time I've ever said that in my life. But I would say like for a regional level athlete who's my size, are probably closer to 185, 190, and I'm kind of floating that 175 to 180. So I probably would need to gain 5 or 10 pounds over the course of my CrossFit career to be super competitive. Of course, getting stronger with that. So again, I don't feel comfortable right now at 177. Like I could not eat breakfast and feel fine. So it's continuing to blend training a lot with my appetite and just really focusing on like very calorie dense foods to keep my weight on. Because again, it's a big contrast if you're expending so much energy and then need to also consume so much energy to maintain and gain weight. And you really can't not train as much, so you have to learn to eat more.
Have you noticed a pretty big change in your physique since you started in terms of like gaining more muscle, or have you kind of just maintained?
Yeah, so that's something that's a little bit frustrating, that like I feel like my physique pretty much looks the same, even though I'm not doing a ton of the same movements. If I actually took some progress photos, I'm sure like my quads are maybe a little bit smaller. But yeah, I think it's just a volume thing. Even though I'm not doing a lot of, say, direct shoulder work or bicep, tricep work, it's like, man, yesterday we did like these rowing intervals, and a row was, a pull, and my biceps were on fire.
Yeah.
It's like a 15-minute break, and we did some ring muscle ups. And that's a lot of just, vertical pulling into a muscle up and then a dip. So even though the movements are typically more compound in nature, right? There's not a lot of isolation stuff. I feel like the sheer volume of training has kind of like allowed me to maintain most of my muscle. And then also to just gaining a little bit of weight. I'm heavier now than I was doing powerlifting, at least at 74 kilos. So that certainly helped. But yeah, I was actually surprised that even when I wasn't doing a ton of volume with CrossFit, when I was only kind of doing maybe an hour or so a day, how little my physique changed. But I think that is just a volume thing. If you look at the density of work that a lot of CrossFit workouts do, it makes sense that you could still hold on to some muscle. And two, some of like my gym's training philosophies and also kind of what I put in, like I'm not just doing burpees and rowing and power cleans for time, if that makes sense. Like there may be specific days, like 2 days ago, we did an EMOM of chin-ups and like an ab movement. Like it was a 15-minute workout of just 5 to 10 chin-ups, hollow rocks, 5 to 10 chin-ups, plank, right? So again, that's just like basic bodybuilding structure work. So not everyone does that, but a lot of intelligent CrossFit programs also program in some bodybuilding specific work, just for like, structural things of we're doing kippy pull-ups and kippy muscle-ups. So you need to also have that isometric static strength before you can start doing a lot of that stuff. So, I still do some bench press. I still do some curls and tricep push downs. It's just not the meat of what I'm doing. It's more like I do all my main stuff, and maybe for 10 minutes afterwards, I'll add some stuff in. So I really haven't seen too many physique changes. I've gotten my body fat tested, and I'm like within 1 or 2% of what I was before I started CrossFit, right after powerlifting. I think my muscle mass has gained a little bit, but I'm pretty much just a little bit bigger version of what I was. So it probably means I could have gotten away with less volume doing bodybuilding and powerlifting and still had a pretty good physique.
Sure. And taking that same question I just asked you about the difficult aspects of nutrition and training, kind of reversing the roles. As a coach, what do you notice from most other people is the most difficult aspect of nutrition and training?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with nutrition first because probably 3/4 of my clients are nutrition related. I think a lot of people is just their consistency. I get a lot of people who are super excited to work with me their first few weeks, and they track in their spreadsheet very consistently. And then it's like their third week, they miss 1 day, and their fourth week, they miss 2 days, and their fifth week, they forgot to track altogether, and it kind of just trickles down from there. So it's really weird to say this, but this is a concept I'm trying to get across to more of my clients of like not being so hot. I mean, hot is like not being so positive when they're doing well, and then not being so cold or negative when they're not doing well, but just focusing on, am I doing the correct things today to get me closer to my goal for tomorrow? Because I think a lot of that inconsistency comes from people being overly emotional about their like current state. So it's like they lost 2 pounds this week and they're super excited and they're like, they want to crush next week and yada, yada, yada. And that works great for them until they don't lose 2 pounds that week and they gained 0.3 pounds. They're now like, well, I worked so hard and I didn't lose any weight, so now I want to give up, right? As opposed to thinking like, okay, I lost 2 pounds this week, but the most important thing was I tracked every single meal I had. And then maybe they only lose a pound the next week, like, oh, I lost less weight this week, but I'm still doing the correct things I needed to do, right? So kind of focusing, I know that the cliche is a little bit, focus on the process, not the outcome. But again, I think just that mindset for people could help them a lot with being more consistent, as opposed to being so focused on whatever metric they're tracking. I think is a big consistency is the biggest problem, but I think the root of that is being too emotional about their transient movement of their body weight or whatever it is. For training for people, I think this is unique to the online system, not so much with if you're doing in-person training, is like motivation. So a lot of people who I work with maybe train in their garage, or they're training alone in a Gold's Gym, or maybe even training by themselves in a corner of a CrossFit gym. There's not a lot of accountability there. So when you have like a coach, but he's across, the United States or across the world, and all you're really seeing is like some numbers on a screen, and you can email once a week, it's really easy to like skip your farmer's walks, or it's really easy to like push the session back because no one's there. No one's going to know if you're doing it or not. So I think for a lot of my training clients, certainly most of my clients do all they're supposed to do. But for some of my more recreational, like body composition clients, I think there's a consistency isn't there so much because of that. I'm not sure a great way to get around that because obviously I'm not going to be there in person, but that's something that they kind of have to just adopt themselves of keeping themselves accountable with the training and also the training intensity, right? Like if I write 4x10 back squats at RPE 8, like they may not push that day, right? Or they may feel like only doing 30 pounds opposed to 20 pounds. So That's the difficulty thing with, I think online training is way more difficult than online nutrition. It's just, there's so many variables with intensity, and they can really quickly just fudge. They actually did their hammer curls. You're never going to know. You're not measuring like their bicep circumference to see if they did their bicep curls. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the big struggle there with training.
Okay. And as far as that nutrition part goes, I think a lot of people see it as like this black and white process of they either lost weight or they didn't lose weight. They don't understand a lot of the underlying factors that contribute, like hydration status, how much sleep they got, stress levels. So I think it's also important to kind of educate them on how many variables there are that contribute. So I don't know. What's your approach to, I know you put out a lot of educational information with Myobrain. So is that kind of your approach to enlightening them about how vast all of this is?
Right. So that's something I just started doing. I mean, I always had like some educational content for my clients as far as like additional stuff. So maybe I'd write an article or make a quick video about something, but I started to be more structured about it maybe 6 or so months ago. Mainly it's because like I was getting to a volume of clients that was so high, and you get the very typical questions of, not maybe typical concerns of, I lost weight during the week. I went out and had a burger and sweet potato fries. I gained 2 pounds. Why'd that happen? Like you kind of just, I had like 8 people ask me that in the same day. So the Myobrain education thing that I released, and it's also open to other people who aren't my clients, is essentially those very, very common questions I get, or I kind of concerns I have with my clients, and then make, say, like a 5 to 15-minute video of just more in depth on that. So again, I have one on like water retention and body weight fluctuations, like, okay, why you gained weight for 1 or 2 days after you went and ate some high sodium food, even if you tracked your macros correctly, what we do afterwards if you did do that. Or like a huge one for people this time of the year is like traveling, like how to eat when you travel, like holiday eating. So a lot of those topics, like you said, that are more complex than just a sentence or two I can send in an email, I can give them a more in-depth general answer in a video so they understand the concept behind that. And going back to this, to your point about like consistency with people, I found that people who are really interested like in the methods of the why of what we're doing tend to have a lot longer buy-in for success. The people who ask me like really superficial questions tend to be people who die off really early. It's like, can I have oatmeal for breakfast? I'm like, ooh, like they're gonna, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Not that they may come a different point of education we have to get them up to, but also just if that's their level of thinking right now, it's going to be difficult for them to really adhere to a flexible plan. Because they're going to go to a place they don't have oatmeal for an option and to kind of freak out. Versus if I have a client ask me, you know, in the past I've lost 5 or 6 pounds in like a month or two, but then I've plateaued my weight even though I'm still eating the same thing. Why does that happen? Right? I can kind of talk to them about like how your metabolism adapts and how you have to drop your food or increase your activity. They come to the table with better questions. They tend to then get a better answer. Now have a better buy-in for like, oh, okay, if I lose 5 pounds in the first month, I know there's an actual plan going forward for how to correct that now. So I think that's kind of like what I see in general with that.
Okay. And now getting into kind of the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to discuss. I kind of wanted to take you through a day of nutrition for like a strength or fitness athlete, and then have you make suggestions for like breakfast, like a pre-workout meal, intra-workout if necessary, post-workout, and then like pre-bed. I think that'd be pretty practical for most people that listen to the podcast. So as far as the morning goes, there's kind of this idea that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It stokes the metabolism. What would your recommendations be for a meal in the morning if it's necessary, and kind of what's your take on that old adage?
Yeah. I usually tell my clients the most important meal of the day is their next one. That's usually the most important meal. For context, what like time of the day would this athlete be training?
Let's say afternoon.
Okay, so like 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay, so I asked that as a question because the closer proximity your workout is to breakfast, the more important that meal would be, right? So you're not really starting from like zero, obviously, when you start your day. But if I have a client who's going to work out like at 10 a.m. and they have breakfast, they wake up at 7, it's probably important for them to have breakfast because it's been 8 hours before they've had food, maybe longer than that. So if they go from eating dinner at 8 p.m. and then having no breakfast and going to go work out at 10 a.m., they're probably not going to feel too hot. So the importance of breakfast is related to how, when you're going to train. I generally give people a recommendation of like, if you wake up normal time of like between maybe like 6 and 8 a.m. of most humans do. If you train like before noon, you probably want to make sure you're having a good amount for breakfast. If you're training afternoon, like 2 p.m. would be that middle ground where you probably can push your breakfast back, but I still would get 1 or 2 meals in there. So my general recommendation is you're training afternoon to try to get around at least half your carbohydrates before that training session. That's going to be relative, right? But say if I have like a male athlete having 300 grams of carbs per day, I would want them to have 150 before they trained at 2 o'clock. So they could have, say, maybe 75 grams for breakfast at 7 o'clock, 75 grams for lunch at noon, and then go train. Or again, they could have 50 at breakfast, a little snack at 11, lunch at 12:50, 75, whatever. Once they accumulated that many carbohydrates before they trained, that would probably set them up for success. I will say carbohydrates for strength athletes, any anaerobic athletes that I work with, are going to be the most important thing to hit. The second most important thing would be protein, not necessarily from a timing perspective. I do think there's some good data out there saying probably between the 4 to 6 times of protein intake a day is better than like 2 to 3. It's not going to be exponentially better, but if you're talking about trying to dot your I's and cross your T's, it's probably better to have more than 3 protein doses throughout your day. So I'd want them to have, kind of just evenly distributed protein throughout their breakfast, lunch, dinner, post-workout. So let's say if this guy weighed 175, he's having 175 grams of protein per day, maybe 30 to 40 grams at breakfast and then at lunch. Also, from just a practical standpoint from that, and this got really popular as like flexible dieting became more popular, and people would just like hoard all their macros for the end of the day and have like 7 pieces of protein cheesecake and have 90 grams of protein. For most people, if you don't have protein in a meal, trying to double up that protein somewhere else can be really hard. So for this example, if I have a guy having, say, 40 grams breakfast, lunch, dinner, post-workout, and then say some residue snack in there, getting the 175. If he doesn't have any for breakfast, he misses that 40, he's going to have like 60, 60, 60. That's a lot of protein. You know what I mean? Or he's going to have like 40, 80, 40. So just from a practical standpoint, if you don't have protein in a meal, it's going to be really dang hard to meet your overall protein needs. Let's just have like a double scoop of a shake or something at night. But that's a good kind of habit to get into, is I think not missing that protein. And then because most of my clients err on a more lower to moderate fat intake, I really want them to moderate their fat intake, but we're not really adding fat to a lot of their diets, if that makes sense. Like they may just have eggs and toast and some milk for breakfast, and it has a few grams of fat from the eggs, a few grams of fat from the milk, but they're not having like avocado with that. Or they're not adding like cashews with their lunch. For most people I work with, their fat is going to increase by them eating enough protein, and if they have some snacks here or there. So that was a long way to answer your breakfast question, but if someone's training afternoon like this person was, the practical thing would be at least half their grams of carbohydrates before then, would be my general recommendation.
Okay. So you did a great job of touching on it. If their meal would be right before the workout, so we'll kind of skip over that. As far as supplementation goes, there are a lot of different supplements like caffeine, creatine, beta-alanine, a lot of pre-made blends. What would you look for in a pre-workout supplement, and why?
Yeah, so This would depend a little bit upon the client, of course. So generally speaking, I think majority of people will do better in their workout with some caffeine. That's probably the one like thing I'm gonna recommend to everyone. The only caveat to that is if you work out late at night and you're not very tolerant to caffeine, that could be a problem. I just did a CrossFit competition a week ago. We had to work out at like 7 o'clock at night is when our heat went. And my partner took a pre-workout. He like never takes pre-workouts, and he stayed up till like 3 a.m. And that sucked for him because we competed the next day. So it wasn't just like stay up till 3 a.m. for no reason. Like then you had to wake up in 4 hours and go compete all day. So if you know you don't tolerate caffeine, and your schedule makes you train at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, getting 2 more reps of bench press may not be worth you sleeping like crap. But pretty much everyone else, if you tolerate caffeine well, I think that's probably the first thing you should look into doing. And then also what I give to people sort of a general guideline is, it depends on your sport, of course, but let's say that we take like a power lifter or a weightlifter. If you're pretty dang good, like myself, for example, like I'm a good squatter, pretty good deadlifter, but not my bench press was always weak, I would always sort of conserve a lot of my caffeine intake for my bench press days, because obviously there's going to be some tolerance built up effect of your caffeine. So if you take 300 milligrams 5 days a week, it's not going to give you so much of a robust effect on any of those days. It can be like a little bit of effect every single day. But if you're good at, say, back squats and front squats on Mondays, maybe you take like almost no caffeine or like 100 milligrams, so you don't really get that big of an effect. But then like Tuesday, you take 300 before you bench press, now you get a bigger effect. So I know it's more complicated for people. That may be more of like a next level application I give people. But to have more of a staggered caffeine intake, whether that's a little bit and a lot or just none and some on days that on like their weak point days, I think it's better than just having 200 straight across, if that makes sense. Then the other stuff that I would look for in a pre-workout, probably citrulline malate is the second one for muscular endurance. So I would say it's probably going to benefit most barbell athletes. You can make an argument it won't make a big difference for like powerlifters or weightlifters, but there's probably going to be points in your training where you're doing 5s or 8s or 10s, or maybe it's the volume of triples gets so high that it kind of becomes muscular endurance like. So citrulline malate, I think, is a good one. That is also, I think, a little bit better than beta-alanine for a couple of reasons. The first reason is you don't have to take it every single day. So you can take citrulline malate at noon and get that muscular endurance effect at 1 o'clock. That's a benefit because if you don't remember to take your beta-alanine, you're not going to get that benefit. Like if you don't remember for 4 days and then you have like a really muscular endurance heavy workout on Friday, like you're screwed. You're not going to take it on Friday and feel it or kind of get that benefit. So I like it for that reason. And then I work with a lot of women, and they just hate that. I forget the technical term for it with beta-alanine, but that itchy, scratchy, flushy of the face, they want to pull their hair out effect. Citrulline malate doesn't have that side effect. So for a lot of people too, it's just a little bit better, so they don't have to deal with that. So those are the two ones I kind of look for people: caffeine, citrulline malate, and then I don't have any problems with creatine and beta-alanine. But again, they don't need to be taken pre-workout. So if you want to take them pre-workout, or if it's already in your product and it's convenient to have it, that's cool. But you can also take them in the morning, post-workout, whatever, because they need to be taken every single day. It's another reason why sometimes it's good to have creatine and beta-alanine on bulk on the side, because if you probably take creatine and beta-alanine 5 or 6 days a week and be fine with it. You don't need to take it every single day for the rest of your life. But let's say like if you're a bodybuilder and you're doing like arms, or you're a powerlifter and doing arms, like a really like just whatever session, you don't want to have to take your pre-workout and get 200 milligrams of caffeine just to get your creatine and beta-alanine in for the day. So that might be a smart move of like just take some creatine and beta-alanine with some Crystal Light and ditch the caffeine. So if you can have that stuff in bulk, that helps you a lot too with do what I mentioned about having kind of that staggered caffeine intake. But a lot of people rely on their pre-workout to get them the creatine and beta-alanine. So I feel like they have to take their pre-workout in order to kind of get those performance supplements as well. So if you can separate those two, the performance stuff and then kind of like the energy immediate stuff, that can be good for them. So caffeine, citrulline malate, definitely actually pre-workout. And then creatine, beta-alanine, definitely for performance reasons, but not necessarily has to be pre-workout.
Okay, awesome. And as far as dosing goes, do you have any just general recommendations that could kind of guide usage?
Yeah, so I think for caffeine, 1 to 300 milligrams is probably going to be right for most people. As a reference for someone, I won't say a cup of coffee. This is a cup of coffee. This is very small. Like a 16-ounce cup of coffee at Starbucks, which is their grande or medium size, is roughly 200 milligrams of caffeine. So a lot of people, like, they take a pre-workout, they take like a Monster, and they're like, oh man, I'm so amped up, like so much caffeine. I'm like, I've seen you drink a venti coffee, like you're fine. Like they just have this placebo effect that it's a pre-workout, so it's so much caffeine. So I think a lot of people are actually a lot more tolerant to caffeine than they think they are. So if you think of a 16-ounce coffee as being a moderate intake for you, which is 200 milligrams is a pretty standard pre-workout dose. I would say that's kind of like the company standards right now. So 100 being like a low end of that if you're doing something not so important or you're very, very sensitive to caffeine. 200 being more moderate training day, you're moderately sensitive to caffeine. And then 300 probably being the upper level for people if it's like a competition day or you're testing your 2-rep max back squat. So again, that's kind of the range I give people. For citrulline malate, 6 to 8 grams is what the research is pretty consistent on. It is sort of expensive, so if you want to go on the 6 gram per workout, that'll save you some money over time. And much like with caffeine, it does have a transient effect, right? So if you have a day, like if you're a weightlifter and I'm just doing like snatch singles from the blocks and then 5 singles of back squats at 80% and some like GHDs, like there's not a lot of volume in that session, like don't take a citrulline malate, right? Like save it for like your 5 sets of 8 and your 6 sets of 3 and stuff like that, the higher volume days as well. With creatine, 3 to 5 grams every single day is pretty standard. And then beta-alanine, 3 to 6 grams every single day as well. I think probably going the higher end of both of those is smart because they're so cheap. You don't want to take 1 less gram of creatine and save yourself $3 a year for it not to work, sort of a thing. So I kind of recommend closer to 5 grams of creatine and 6 grams of beta-alanine as the performance stuff.
Okay, awesome. And then kind of touching on another supplement, if we're looking at intra-workout supplementation, branched chain amino acids are very popular, and I see a lot of people drinking them kind of casually. Maybe if you could give us an example of when they would be useful and when they're just kind of a waste of money, I think that'd be helpful for a lot of listeners.
Yeah. So I think for 95% of people, they're going to fall in that waste of money category, and mainly for 2 reasons. So the primary reason is that if you're doing your diet correctly, you're going to be having enough BCAAs or just overall protein in your blood throughout the day that it becomes very redundant to have a specific amount at a specific time. So again, like if you eat chicken, there's leucine and isoleucine and valine, the branched chains in that chicken. Or if you eat eggs, any complete protein source can be very, very high in the branched chains. So say if you're that person working out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that we discussed, and you have 40 grams of protein at breakfast, 40 grams of protein at lunch, and then you go train, you have plenty of branched chains in your blood already. So there's not really going to be a benefit there. So that's going to be the main reason why most people don't need to take it, if assuming your protein is high enough. And if it's not high enough, then you should just eat more protein. You shouldn't have branched chains. Then if a few situations where I think it could be beneficial, The first one that I can recommend for people is like more the fasted training. So if you're waking up at 4:45 and you're at the gym by 5, and you're moving by 5:15, you're probably not going to have eggs and oatmeal before you train. I recommend for some people to have like whey protein and a banana and see how they feel with that. But some people don't do well with whey protein, or they just like the branched chains because the branched chains over protein because they tend to be more like a fruity flavor. So a lot of people will just feel better in the morning having like fruit punch or watermelon as opposed to like chocolate or vanilla. It just like sits better with them. That's more of a flavoring thing, I think, than the actual product. But again, if you know you're not going to eat a high dose of protein and it's been 6 to 8 hours since you've eaten food, it probably would then make sense to have some branched chains or whey, something fast digesting, just to to make it less likely you're going to have any kind of like protein breakdown, during that session. And it's probably a lot more important for people who are in a caloric deficit than in a surplus. If you're in a surplus, you probably aren't going to lose any muscle throughout your entire day. But if you're doing like a bodybuilding competition or cutting weight for a weightlifting meet, powerlifting meet, then you want to make sure you're not really pushing the envelope, if that makes sense, on maybe I can get away with this and have just water, but maybe if I just spent $20 on some aminos, I would ensure I'm not going to lose any muscle mass. Then the other one would just be if you're training twice or multiple times in a day. So like I said, if I go train at noon and then come back at 5, I'm not going to have a lot of protein intake in between those two sessions, probably just one meal. So it would make sense for me to have like some fast digesting carbs and either whey protein or branching amino acids after I train, and then maybe an actual meal at like 2:30 or 3, and then go back and train. So I mean, that's a general rule with nutrient timing is the closer your workouts are to each other, the more important nutrient timing becomes, or you want to have something quickly after you train, and then have it be fast digesting like branched chains or whey, and also a carbohydrate that's pretty fast digesting. And then kind of one other quick point to make on the branched chains, as far as like intra-workout stuff. So there's some data showing like just having a sweet solution in your mouth can decrease your rate of perceived exertion. So this could be a reason why a lot of people like legitimately feel like they work out better or harder when they're drinking branched chain amino acids, but it has nothing to do with the actual branched chain amino acids. Like they could just be drinking sweetener and have that same effect. So I always have usually a carbohydrate solution while I train. And it's not because like I feel like I'm going to run out of glycogen in an hour session. It's because I generally think that if I have a sweet taste like in between my sets of stuff, from doing intervals, having some sweet taste of some sugar in between those intervals, it actually can decrease that RPE. So I think that could be happening for some people. It's not totally a placebo effect. It's not what they think is benefiting them is not what's actually benefiting them. And they probably can do a cheaper way.
Sure. So if someone was looking to kind of implement that same strategy, would you just recommend any kind of carbohydrate beverage like a Gatorade or a Powerade, or would you recommend like a specific amount?
Yeah. So for my fat loss clients, I really don't want them to be having a lot of, if a girl has 130 grams of carbs a day, I don't want her to drink 30 grams of pure sugar, whether that's a Coke or a Gatorade or whatever. I would rather her eat most of that from actual whole foods. So I recommend there is either it's like literally like a Crystal Light or a Mio squeeze or whatever to get that taste of something, or they could maybe push it with like a G2, which generally has about that's like a low cal Gatorade. It usually has about 12 grams of carbs per serving. Or if you buy like your own actual carbohydrate powder, you probably can do like for someone dieting, probably like 10 to 20 grams during that session. Probably closer to 10 grams if you're a girl, closer to 20 grams if you're a guy. And then again, if you're a performance athlete, that could be a lot. Like I've had sessions where I have like 40 grams of carbs during my session, which is like an actual Gatorade, or like 2 scoops of my carb powder. That also serves multiple purposes. So I mean, this kind of gets into the weeds with how different nutrition can be. But again, if I'm trying to have 500 grams of carb per day, it may just be like a good idea for me to have a lot while I train, not even if it didn't benefit me, but just because like it's going to help me get to 500. You know what I'm saying? So for me, a lot of the dense carbohydrates like that are just like, well, I could drink water, but that's, another pancake I'm about to eat tonight, right? Which is not a bad problem to have. But it's also just sort of if I train twice a day and I can get 40 grams of carbs in during both of those sessions or right after those sessions, that's, like a fifth of my carb intake for the day. So it's just more feasible for me. So I would say for performance reasons, though, probably 30 to 40. I wish I had the actual like numbers in my head of like gram per kilogram, whatever I recommend. But I would say like 30 to 40 is probably going to be the sweet spot for most people. But that also needs to make sense with your diet. If you're a performance athlete and you're a girl and you're on like 210 grams of carbs per day, having 40 grams of carbs while you train maybe isn't the best decision. So you have to put in context how many grams of carbs you should have while you train with your overall intake. It's more about your relative intake than it is your goal. Even if someone's on a fat loss diet, if I have a girl on a fat loss diet and she's having 240 carbs, like cool, she can have a G2 and be fine. Even if she's in contest prep. So make sure it makes sense with your overall diet and you're not just doing it because someone said so on a podcast sort of thing.
Okay. Sure. And then I guess we touched on this briefly, but as far as like a post-workout anabolic window goes, I guess it would be a similar situation to like the carbohydrate intake. I'm sure protein wouldn't hurt, but maybe if you could touch on situations where it would be necessary and where it's kind of just superfluous and just takes up some of your macros.
Yeah. So this is much like the branch chain question, where I think if you train one time a day or one time in 24 hours is probably more appropriate, then you don't need to like rush in your protein intake post-workout. The benefit you get from like an increase in muscle protein synthesis post-workout lasts much, much longer than you think it does. Certainly longer than an hour. So if it's like convenient for you to have like some whey protein after you train, and for a lot of people it is, like if you don't, again, like I said, like I don't have a big appetite, I'm not going to go crush like chicken and rice 20 minutes after I train, then yeah, go for it. But I had a conversation with a client the other day where her husband said that he like went to the gym, trained, it didn't have a shake with him. He got home and was like mad because he like thought he wasted his workout, right? And like we laugh at that, but like people legitimately still think that. So if you're that person, understand that you probably have closer to a 2, 4, 8 hour window. As a bigger picture, building muscle is such a long process that you probably should, if you're training one time in a day, you probably should just be focused on, did I meet my overall protein goal for the day? And if you do that for like 6 months, a year, 2 years, and you train hard and you're, in a caloric surplus, like you're going to build muscle. I find it highly unlikely that if you had two groups of people for a year and one had a protein shake after they trained, one didn't, and they both ate the same amount of protein and trained the same, that there would be a difference. And that kind of goes back to that the frequency of meals that people have generally lends them to being anabolic most of the time. So if you're in a caloric surplus at the end of the day, you probably want a caloric surplus most of the day, unless you have like a really, really crazy meal schedule. But like if you had a pre-workout meal at noon and went and trained at 2, like you're not fasted. Like you don't need to shake at 3:15. Like you just ate 3 hours ago. Like you're probably just now breaking down that food. So for most people, the context of their post-workouts really isn't important. Because again, if they do their pre-workout stuff correctly, it kind of gives them a buffer anyways. And again, you should be focused on your daily frequency of meals and your daily intake of these nutrients. And if you do that correctly, the timing of stuff tends to take care of itself. Versus if you start with the timing and then you try to go backwards to the big picture, it doesn't really work out the same way all the time. Like I said, if you start with timing, right, okay, I'm going to have 40 grams of dextrose and 40 grams of whey after I train. And then you start building like your other meals, then you're going to be like, oh, well, now I ran out of carbs because I had 40 grams of sugar, while I trained. Like, do I need to do that? Versus if you back up and say like, okay, I have 200 grams of carbs to eat today. How can I distribute that throughout my day? That'll probably take care of your glycogen needs and your protein needs. So yeah, that's probably for most people. And then going back to the timing of your sessions, if you train multiple times in a day, that's probably where I would say that having some protein after that session is going to be ideal. Or if you train, say like, if you train Tuesday at 7 p.m. and then coming back Wednesday at 8 a.m., like there's not a lot of, even though it's a different day, not a lot of actual time between that, and certainly not a lot of actual calories consumed between that, then like, yeah, having a high protein dinner as quickly as you can after your night session before your morning session would be ideal, because kind of going to function as like a post-workout meal / pre-workout meal for the morning workout.
Okay, awesome. And then kind of fast forwarding to right before bed, a lot of casein, protein, a lot of the ads for casein protein kind of push this supplementation before bed. The research I've looked at, it's kind of equivocal. It's like as long as you match protein intake, it doesn't really matter. But do you have any general recommendations on a pre-bed meal and maybe your whys behind them?
Yeah. So I think that kind of what you touched upon is that if you're matching protein, it's probably not going to matter. And again, I think a lot of this stuff, when I say doesn't matter that much, is all in context of your goal as well. That's really important to note. I have some clients that I work with who were like this close from their lifetime goal in CrossFit. And like, I will tell them stuff that like, I think has 1 in 1,000 chance of helping them. But like, if it helps them do 1 second faster in one workout, it's worth it. You know what I mean? So if you're 3 kilos away from breaking an American record, like take your aminos, take your casein, do your Epsom salt baths, like whatever you want to do, like any possible thing you think can improve your performance, go for it. Drink your kombucha, right? But if you're like a mom with 2 kids and you like work out 3 times a week, like don't drink casein protein powder, right? Like, so it's also in the context of what your ultimate goal is. The more serious you are about your goal, the more you're going to push a lot of stuff we're talking about. But again, 99% of people with recreational kind of habits and goals shouldn't be focused on this stuff. They should be focused on the big picture stuff. That's going to get them the best bang for their buck. The reason why more elite people can worry about kombucha and casein intake and all that stuff, because they figured out the other stuff. Like they have their macros dialed in for the day. They have their training figured out. They sleep 9 hours a day, and then they do the 1% stuff. But a lot of recreational people, they sleep 6 hours a day, train 3 days a week, have a stressful job, and then want to take casein protein powder, right? They're not having kind of the bigger conversation what they need to do. So I don't really think that any sort of magical protein source or amount is ideal before bed. I would recommend for some people to play around with their actual kind of meal size and probably more the carbohydrate size and type pre-bed to see if it actually helps them with sleep. So there actually is some research out there with either like higher glycemic index carbs or just even a higher amount of carbohydrates helping people fall asleep, kind of like your time to sleep or like your overall sleep quality. So that needs to fit in the context of your day, right? I'm not just saying like have a whole bunch of Cinnamon Toast Crunch because it's high glycemic and it's really dense. If that puts you over your carb number for the day, it's not a good decision. But like if you have 300 grams of carbs to eat throughout your day, and you can like make sure 60 to 70 of those can be like white rice before you go to bed, see how that impacts your actual sleep. If someone has problem with sleeping, that's generally one of the things that I'll recommend to them. If I see that they're like maybe not having a big dinner, I'll try to increase their carbs at that dinner meal and see if it helps them fall asleep. If you're not having trouble falling asleep, probably not really worth looking into. But again, that's not a protein thing. That's more of a carbohydrate thing. And that's a really like complicated topic. The research I looked at that in grad school was like, they're looking at like the ratio of carbohydrates to neutral amino acids, and like you can really get into the weeds as far as like what's ideal. But from what I took of reviewing a lot of the research, it really was just having a pretty high carbohydrate to protein ratio, and then making sure those carbohydrates were pretty high glycemic index. That's generally what the actual food protocols look like.
Awesome. So I think we pretty much covered that section. Another thing I wanted to touch on was what we were talking about at the start of the podcast. It's kind of your tips to create a plan and then follow through with them. So resources to become educated on like the nutrition basics, and then improving an adherence to like a good diet that you can kind of formulate.
Yeah. So resources are tough. I think actually it's really weird that I think the more information that is presented to people, the harder it is to find good information, because it's just like everyone's talking about this stuff now. I think for a lot of like good practical stuff, I still think a lot of the founders of flexible dieting and things like that are guys like Alan Aragon, Lyle McDonald, Eric Helms. They do a very good job of getting through the weeds of a lot of the small questions and helping you really dig into the big picture, which I think is what most people need. Not to go on a rant here, but like you've been on Instagram in the past year, for some reason, everyone thinks it's really cool to have like a white background on their IG post with like these little like 8-year-old graphics of hypertrophy means 3 sets of 8 to 12. And it's like, these foods are high protein, these foods are high carb. Like, you know what I mean? You see those little graphics. Those are fine. Like I get what those are doing. They're providing like little tidbits of information, like nuts aren't a protein source, it's a fat source. Like, yeah, I think a lot of people get that though. But I don't think posting little things like that, it's really cool for likes and building the following, but you're not really getting people to see the big picture of stuff, which I think is still the problem for a lot of people. It's like I can have a 2-minute conversation with you of like, oh, you're overweight, like you're eating too many calories. You need to figure out why you're eating too many calories, what those food sources are, and decrease them. Like that's what you need to do. Like, I don't think education is the answer for a lot of people, if that makes sense. I think a lot of people are very aware that having Pop-Tarts and waffles is not as good for them as having eggs and a bagel, sort of thing. So that's kind of like where I think where some good information is, and then not where some bad information is, like on Instagram and stuff. But just understand, like you have to still seek out the big picture. Little infographics are cool for nuggets, but they're not going to get you to where you want to be. They're just kind of fun facts, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then again, I think with the second question you had about really adherence and consistency with stuff, again, I think for a lot of people, they need to figure out the big picture why behind what they want, why they think their fitness goal or their health goal or whatever is important to them. And not a superficial why, not like, oh, well, I want to look good for my vacation, or like, you know, I want to have bigger biceps or girls will like me. You know what I mean? Like actually spending some time, like, why is it important for me to do these things? And then ultimately doing, I think this may sound bad, but doing it for like really selfish reasons. I always kind of laugh when I hear people like athletes say like, oh, I'm doing this for my kids and doing this for my parents and doing this for I'm like, all your kids and your parents and your wife, and they would probably like you if you didn't do this. Like at the end of the day, you should be doing this for you. Like you shouldn't be, you know, in the gym 5, 6, 7 hours a week for someone else to think you have a good physique, or for your wife to give you a compliment. Like it should be for you to have better confidence for yourself. That sounds very like selfish and arrogant, but like that's what you're doing it for, because like not to be blunt, like no one else really cares. Like people who like think you're a cool person probably think you're cool whether you're skinny, fat, or in between. So you need to dig deep into yourself internally and why it's important for you, whether it's like, you know, I want to be a bodybuilder because I want to see like how awesome I can make my physique. Or I want to be a weightlifter or a powerlifter because I want to see how much my legs can actually squat. You know what I mean? Or I want to see how fast I can do burpees over this bar and be competitive with somebody else. But man, I think so many people are just tied into trying to impress other people, and they're not really focused upon why that goal is important to them, right? So I always kind of tell my clients that, like, don't lose 10 pounds for me. Don't lose 10 pounds for your husband or your wife. Like, this is your journey that you have to accept responsibility for. And I think when people can do that, when they become very internally motivated about stuff, again, their consistency helps a lot because they know why it's important to them. And it's not, you can lose 20 pounds and then none of your friends notice. And you're like, holy crap, what was that for? But if you just want to see what you look like in the mirror when you bust your ass for 3 months, when you do that, you're happy. And whether someone else is impressed with that or not doesn't really matter to you.
I couldn't agree with that more. And actually was kind of put in a similar situation where a girl was telling me like, oh, I don't like when guys look that lean. And I'm currently dieting. And I was just thinking to myself, I just want to see how my legs look when they get shredded, or like how much detail I can bring in. It is exactly that personal satisfaction. So, amen, brother.
Yeah. It's a big problem for people. I think just in general in life, when they try to do other things to impress other people, even if they accomplish that thing, they realize how empty that goal was, as opposed to if they didn't meet maybe a objective as high of measure of their physique or their lifts or whatever. If they did that like for them, like dude, I'm not a good snatcher, right? Like my best snatch is 210, but the day I snatch 225, I'm going to be super excited. I don't care what you could snatch or what Klokov could snatch or that Matty Rogers can snatch 225. Like if I put 2 plates on a bar and snatch it, I'm going to be excited for me. And I don't really care what anybody else perceives of my snatch ability because I worked really damn hard to snatch 225 whenever I do it. You know what I mean? I think that satisfaction is a lot more important than like snatching 225 and looking around to see did anybody see it or like someone put it on Instagram or not. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to be happy when that happens. You know what I mean?
Okay, so that's pretty much all I have for like the nutrition and training part. I do have like some abstract kind of philosophical questions I like to ask all of the guests I bring on. So the first one is, besides physical improvements, why do you think everyone should strength train and eat well? And what has adopting these habits done for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think as dumb as this sounds, getting into like sports and lifting and nutrition, I kind of found out that man, if you just like really work hard in something, it's hard not to get good at it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I think with training nutrition, I got really obsessed with it at a time where I wasn't super in control of my environment, right? But I found that like, oh man, like if I go to the gym and hit chest every single Monday and have this protein powder afterwards and sleep a lot, like my chest will get bigger. Like if I work hard, eat correctly, I can control my environment in a sense. And I think that started to bleed over. I mean, obviously adopt this at a very young age where it was beneficial for me to learn these things. But going into college, I kind of like just started to apply. I was not a good student in high school at all. Because I didn't like care. And I was like, why do I need to like memorize the capitals of these states and, what's a carbon bond, whatever. Right. But I started to then like just apply the same principles of like, man, if I just like study more than everybody else in this library and read this chapter and highlight everything and no one else will do that, like I'm going to get a good score on the test. Right. And that sounds really dumb as like now a full grown adult to think that, but like I didn't really connect that dot of just like, man, there's obviously a point you have to be somewhat fortunate and a lot of things have to go your way. But a lot of the things you think aren't controllable in your life really are if you just work hard enough. And I kind of felt that same way through, I learned that at least through training nutrition of like, I was not a naturally big guy. I was not a naturally strong guy, but I just did this for longer and harder and smarter than everybody else. and 2-3 years later, I'm like pretty good at what I do. And once I applied that to other areas of my life, I was like, I could also be successful in that avenue. So I think that's just like a general attitude that I adopted from training nutrition. But again, I think a lot of people still don't have. You have people who are like, I just have a small chest. Like they just think that that's their destiny. And I guarantee you, there's the same people who are just like, you know what, I'm never gonna get into that school. You know what, I'm never gonna get that girl. I'm never gonna whatever. I'm never gonna get that job. Never whatever. They just have that attitude of that is their destiny, as opposed to being able to work hard and sort of shape their own destiny. I'm not saying like you can think your way to 800-pound bench press, right? But I'm saying you probably can be a lot better at most things than you think you are if you work really hard at them. And I learned that through training. I learned that I remember bench pressing the curl bar in like 7th, 8th grade, first day of weights, and then like senior year of high school, I could do 225 for 5. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I think that's kind of like the thing I took home from getting into bodybuilding really initially.
Awesome. Okay, the next question is, what is the worst mistake you've made as an athlete, a coach, and then a businessman?
Oh, wow. The worst mistake. I don't think I've had it. I'll start with athlete first. I don't think I've had any like one big mistake that I can think of. I think the most consistent mistake that I've made though is train when I'm a little bit hurt, trying to push through it. Like taking nagging pain and turn it into like weeks of not being able to train. I don't have like on October 13th, whatever day like this happened. I've never had like an acute injury, if that makes sense. But I've had definitely days where I should have stopped squatting. I continued to squat, if that makes sense. So that's my biggest mistake as an athlete. And I've certainly learned to be better about that and be more humble of like, I've done like on Monday, my back was super sore from this deadlift ladder we did on Saturday. I did supposed to do some clean and jerks. I cleaned 205, which is like 70% for me. I was like, I'm probably going to miss this jerk. I'm not even going to try. I just did like full cleans. I didn't do any jerks. My back was on fire. Versus maybe if I applied that same thing to bodybuilding, I would have been like, oh, my back's on fire, but I got to do these dumbbell rows. I got to get it in. So I've just become more smart with that. As a coach, oh man, I don't know as a coach. I don't have any, maybe it's probably a good thing. I don't have any single dumbest things I can think of that like really stand out. I think one thing that I didn't do well as a coach initially is I assumed a lot of my clients knew a lot of stuff, especially as I started to get bigger and doing a lot more nutrition. I just kind of like glossed over a lot of the basics, assuming my clients already knew that. So I kind of would already go to the second level of stuff and not really confirm with them like, okay, so you know what caloric balance is, right? Like for some people, like they may have, because this happened, I would work with someone for like 3-4 weeks, like they'd be doing well, they'd be tracking these numbers, they didn't even knew what they were, sort of thing, and be eating correctly and losing weight or whatever their goal was. And they'd ask me a question like, oh, like, so I've been having eggs and oatmeal for breakfast every day. Is it cool if I have eggs and toast tomorrow? And I'm like, oh no, like you didn't get it. You know what I mean? So you can still be successful and not really know why you're being successful. So the last, year and a half, I've done a lot better job, I think, of going over the basics with everyone. Like, even if you like are a personal trainer or like, you know what I mean? I would think that they know that stuff. I still like hammer home little stuff. And then if I kind of get the vibe during our consult that they're like, yeah, I get it, then I'll kind of move on. But that's something I've done a better job of not skimming over a lot of the basic stuff. I thought I could get away with that initially because I would say I wasn't trying to get away with it. I think I did get away with it initially with clients because when I started coaching people, everyone that came to me like knew, like I said, who 3DMJ was. Like they weren't new to tracking macros. But like now I get like a mom from a random gym who like heard about me from someone else, and they're like, I'm trying this macro thing. Like they don't know what they're doing. You know what I mean? When they start. So they're the average person getting into flexible dieting now is starting at a much lower education for nutrition, which sounds weird. But as it's gotten more popular, more people are doing it, and it's brought down the average level of education. So you have to really bring them up to pace, which is kind of like what I was talking about with the actual like understanding the why behind things versus just like cool infographics. That you have to really educate people now versus when it was just 10,000 people watching the Ogus video, we all got it. Like we all knew what was going on, sort of thing. And then business, I still consider myself a business person too much. I don't know if this was a big mistake or not. I'll say I don't have a single big mistake, but I think mistakes that I continuously do are to make projects bigger than they need to be, if that makes sense. I think with the online space, it's better to, and I could be wrong about this, but this is at least my current thinking process. It's better to have like 1 month goals, 3 month goals, even if like what you're completing at the end of those 1 and 3 months aren't that grandiose. It's better to do that than like think, okay, in 18 months, I'm putting out this product that's going to change the fitness industry. Because unless you just have like a huge, once you get to a certain level, I'm sure, like if you're like precision nutrition or like you have, 80 employees, I have no idea, but say you have 80 employees and you have a graphic designer and you have marketing people and you have 8 consultants and you know what I mean? Then like you can do some really like cool big stuff. You have the time allocated to do that. But for a lot of the smaller consulting people who are just essentially like maybe 1 to 5 people on their MacBooks, essentially is what the business is. You need to focus on more like tangible things you can create in a short time frame. Because most of us are still making the bulk of our income through consulting. And if I take up a project that's going to like drain me for 5-6 hours a day for a year, my consulting is going to be like going to crap. So unless I want to like take my clients from like 70 to 20 and then focus my time on like writing a book or making a really awesome media project, then like I can't afford to do that. I need to focus more on like small things that I can create for people that have a bigger change. So that's probably something I struggle with a lot initially with consulting, is like wanting to have these big picture ideas and then getting 2 weeks into them being like, this is going to take me 3 years to do. And it's kind of a waste of my time to do all that. As opposed to like now I'm more focused on like the Myobrain education thing. Is like I made like a separate tab on my website. I made it password protected. I committed to making 2 videos a month. I wrote outlines for what videos I wanted to start with and started cranking out, videos for my clients, like a very quick, tangible thing. Or a couple of my newer projects, like making a recipe book and making like a holiday eating guide. So, I wrote down like, okay, I want to have this many recipes. I'm going to like test out this many per week. It's going to be an 8-week project. I'm going to give it to my designer. It's going to be done in 10 weeks. As opposed to being like, I'm going to make a 500 recipe cookbook and it's going to have all these photos and have the 100 best protein brownies. That's how I would have thought a year ago, is to make like a world changing project as opposed to just a really good project for my audience.
Awesome. Great stuff. So moving on, what are some resources outside of nutrition, strength training, and fitness that you would recommend to all listeners? So these can be podcasts, books, or just individuals in general.
Oh, look at this. It's right here, which I have in my book. No, that's kind of a joke, but not really. Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends what you're interested in. I did show a book about called The Daily Stoic, which I think is probably actually a really good book for someone to read. But yeah, I would say it sounds really like cliche, but a lot of the, mindfulness stuff is getting really popular now. Like there's 5,000 meditation apps and things like that. And again, it's becoming very trendy and much like macros did a couple of years ago. But I still think a lot of that stuff can be applied to your life and fitness and make you successful. So, like what I was talking about of like me snatching 225, that's going to make me happy, not somebody else. Like you probably could find a less meathead way of seeing that, like in a stoicism book. You know what I mean? So again, like people can think however they want to think, and that's not my judgment to do that. But I still think that listening to people that maybe have done what you've wanted to do, or kind of like maybe 10 years older than you in the same field, a lot of them have the same messages, which is kind of funny. Like whether they're like an author or a personal trainer or a business person, like they're all like 35 and successful in what they were doing, and they have nothing in common with their actual crafts, but they have everything in common with the actual message about it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that stuff does come from, I would say it comes from stoicism, but it reminds me a lot of stoicism, of like the way they approach things. I think probably like as far as a general base of stuff, like Tim Ferriss's podcast helped me a ton with that. And that's kind of where I learned that of like, man, you have Anthony Robbins and Jamie Foxx, and like people are nothing like each other at all, right? But then you hear them talk and it's like, that's what that guy said. That's what that guy said. Like it seems very familiar. So those are kind of like what I really enjoy doing is seeing, successful people, whatever you want to mark that as, in a variety of avenues, and then learning kind of like what they have in common with each other and how you can apply that to your life. We live in an awesome time now where you have exposure to like the smartest people in the world. Like, 50 years ago, I don't know who the smartest person was, but like you couldn't have heard the Elon Musk of 50 years ago on a podcast. You know what I mean? But you can jump on Tim Ferriss's podcast or Joe Rogan's podcast, or just like Google these people's name and then say podcast afterwards. They've probably been talking to someone on the internet about like their life philosophies for like hours, So I think it's really dumb if you're an ambitious person not to look at those people. And I don't mean look at them like, you don't have to worship Steve Jobs, but just, watch some of Steve Jobs interviews and like see how he looked at the world. I think is an important thing to do if you're looking for ways to be successful. And I think that's important because it's not task specific. Like I'm not going to work for Apple. You know what I mean? Like yeah. I'm not listening to Steve Jobs to like make the new MacBook. Like I want to see like how he thought when he wanted to make a new product, the thought process behind that. I think that can be applied pretty much anywhere. So I would say Tim Ferriss is probably the best place to go for podcasting. One recommendation for that kind of stuff. And then books, probably my still favorite book is Flow by Mihaly something. If you Google Flow, I think it's called The Psychology of Optimal Experience. It's probably a lot of stuff that I've been talking about of, finding what you're truly passionate about and kind of getting lost in that activity and not doing things for the wrong reasons. I have way too many other books that I think I could recommend, but that's still probably the number one thing that I think is when I'm trying to recommend one thing that can bleed over into all other things. That's a really big one. And then probably anything by Malcolm Gladwell too. I'm a huge fan of. Probably David and Goliath is my favorite one, which I don't think is as popular, but pretty much a whole bunch of stories about like people overcoming crazy obstacles essentially in their life. And it's really unique because it talks about how not only they overcome those obstacles, he kind of makes a point for because they had those obstacles, and that's why they were so great. Like, I wish I could give you some examples, but somewhere in the book it talks about like a disproportionate amount of U.S. presidents had their dads die super young. I forgot what the number was, but like it was way above like average, right? So he kind of, I would say, made the argument, but he's like, a lot of these, male presidents had their dads die at age 7 or 8 or whatever, and not saying that drove them to become the president of the United States, but it's like a weird coincidence. You know what I mean? So I really like the David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell as well.
That's really interesting. I've actually had on like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I've had on Jacob Sipkin, a few other people, and they all recommend like stoic authors or something
Yeah.
that's relating to Stoicism. So it's a kind of an interesting connection. And then the last question I have before we wrap up is, what is one thing that people can do each day to better their lives?
Ooh. Um, Man, I'm trying to get a super. I think a lot of podcasts people give the same answers, but it's really bad because those are actually like good answers.
Right.
I mean, I think just in general, it's being more introspective of what they're doing. So, especially with a lot of people that I work with, I'm sure that you work with, we're very like go, go, go people. And it's very easy to like forget a lot of the little things that we're doing. And again, a lot of stuff sounds like super cliche. And I'm the least inspirational person of all time. Like I hate inspiration stuff. But man, like there's been some really like cool moments where like my life is really good, right? I think if you have like an iPhone and internet connection, your life's pretty good. Um, and there have been times in my day where I'm like the fourth person in line waiting at a Walgreens. All I need is a Gatorade on my hand, and like the people up front are like talking about like some stuff I don't care about, and like the other person's not even paying attention. They're not going to walk up in line. I'm like 5 minutes late for the gym, and I'm like stressed out about this, and I'm like, I'm stressed out because I have a Gatorade in my hand. I'm about to drink the sugar water and go recreationally train for an hour and a half at a really nice gym, and then drink my tasty protein shake and get in my nice car. And you know what I mean? Like, what are you complaining about? And that comes from just being introspective about what your feelings are at the moment, as opposed to being so reactive of like, I want this person in traffic go faster. This lady at Walgreens, just hurry up and get out of the way. So I think when I'm really introspective about what I'm doing, a lot of my problems tend to go away. And I'm just generally a happier person when I'm more introspective about what's going on right now.
Excellent, Greg. Excellent. So wrapping up, we'll get to the plug section. So where can our listeners find out more about you? And are there any current projects that you're working on?
Yeah. So probably Instagram is the best overall way to look at my stuff. It's just Myobrain, MYO brain. Same thing on Facebook. I don't post as much on Facebook though as I do Instagram. Instagram, I do a lot of stuff where it's educational posts. I'll do like Instagram live sometimes, do Q&As and whatnot. I've kind of gotten off of YouTube as well. I think just Instagram has kind of just been a more accessible way for me to reach my audience. And then my website is myobrainperformance.com. You can check out, there's still some articles up there, but a lot of it's pretty much just like my consulting stuff. If you want to look at the options there, or if I do seminars, most of them are locally, like nutrition seminars. And then, like I mentioned kind of briefly in the podcast, my two somewhat bigger projects for the rest of this year will be making my first ever like recipe book, which I don't know why it took me so long to do this, but mostly for my clients, but it'll also be free in general. It's not going to be anything crazy, but just some fun, macro friendly, pretty simple meals for people to try out. Mostly it's for my clients to kind of have, some new stuff to do. And then also I'll be putting out like a holiday eating guide as far as like some general tips and stuff like that. As right now, I think it's going to be like 6 habits to ditch and 6 habits to adopt for like the holiday season. And it will be like a really quick video series, and that'll be on Instagram as well.
Awesome. And are you currently accepting clients or consults? Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
yes. So you can check that out at myobrainperformance.com. You should click on consulting. And then if you actually have any direct questions, you can email me at myobraincoaching@gmail.com for nutrition and training consulting. Yeah.
Awesome. I want to thank you again for coming on and kind of donating your time. I think this was an awesome episode. I think there's a lot of very, very valuable information. So any last words before we kind of part ways?
No, man. Thank you. And hope your listeners learned something.
Yeah, no problem.